Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, your RB Laws, and this is my co-host,
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. We do have a comment to read from Nahanu on YouTube, and he said, "What do you mean forget? Good centers aren't just roaming on the streets, and they've been trying to deal Bi out, but no one wants to pay him." I kind of agree with you on that, but at the same time, they kind of put themselves in this predicament. They traded away every single center, so now you're relying on Eves Missy or Zion at the 5, and obviously Tice as well. But yeah, that center room is just not looking good. I will say Bi is a completely different story. I think his trade value is just gone. So I do agree with you on that front.
Yeah, and that's the fair point where it's like, I'm sure they've been trying. It's just ultimately, it's been to no success. And, that's kind of the tough problem is that the roster just doesn't necessarily have a lot of guys that fit together, and it would be easier if you could kind of swap some guys out. But so far, it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to do that. And that's the tough part that we talked about in our previous episode about New Orleans.
Yeah, shout out to you guys. It did very well. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yes, so now we're moving on to the Memphis Grizzlies, the last team of the Southwest Division. And this team is a little bit different than some of these other teams in this division. They were pretty bad. They were 27-55. They were 13th in the Western Conference, 30th on offense, 12th in defense, 26th in net rating. But there's some key things there's some key context that has to kind of be applied here, right? One, this was the most injured team in NBA history, right? Like this was actually like a statistical proven fact, right? Where they actually have, like a stat where they kind of basically had like, the most amount of games lost due to the things like injuries and suspensions. And then this Memphis Grizzlies team, was by far was the one for this season and of all time. They had basically 594 player games lost due to injury, rest, personal suspension, and over 500 of them were due to injuries, right? There were not very many that were due to personal reasons, rest, or suspensions. And you look around the roster, Desmond Bane, 42 games. Jaren Jackson Jr., 66, which isn't really that bad, but still. Marcus Smart, 20 games. John Morant, their main guy, their superstar, 9 games. Luke Kennard, 39 games. I mean, and they also had 33 players play games at different points for them, right? Which you don't normally have unless something went very wrong, and something went very, very wrong this season for the Memphis Grizzlies, just because you had a crazy amount of injuries. They did make some moves at the deadline, right? So that also kind of changed some of the players on the roster. But by and large, it was a very unlucky year for them. Coming off a year where they had a great regular season, and then unfortunately they came up short in the first round, losing to the Lakers, right? Where they, you had, no Steven Adams and Brandon Clark. But either way, it felt like they got kind of humbled, and then Dylan Brooks leaves, right? And they kind of make some other changes, right? Tyus Jones is gone. So, then they bring in guys like Marcus Smart and others, and nothing really went their way. But this time around, they have an opportunity to, turn things around in a way where can you have at least somewhat relatively average health? Like, is that possible? I mean, they've already lost G.G. Jackson for a little bit with a foot injury, but he wasn't necessarily one of their, 5, 6, 7 main guys anyways, right? So, sure. Now that you have all your other guys back, you can afford to be without him for a little bit. Obviously, it sucks for him because he's so young and he had a good rookie year, but he had so many opportunities because of the injuries. But you look around and you look at what they did this offseason. Obviously they did a couple of things, right? They brought back Luke Kennard. But really, most of what they did was tied to the draft because they did a lot of their offseason stuff the previous year. And they drafted a few guys. They drafted Zach Edey, and they drafted Jalen Wells, right? So, and I mean, they're like a couple other guys as well, right? But like they were, I think, like they're basically like two-way guys.
Yeah.
So, you look around and obviously Zach Edey is kind of the big guy, right? No pun intended. That's the big pick, obviously, that they made 9th overall, 22-year-old. And obviously it was kind of funny because at the time, right, a lot of the mock drafts I think had him going a little bit lower. right? But they didn't necessarily have him because some people thought he might fall a lot. But I had him mocked around, I want to say whatever OKC's pick was, right? So what was that, 12 or so?
Yeah.
But he went higher and he went ninth. And obviously, with Memphis, we know they wanted a center in the draft because they were looking to possibly trade up to get Donovan Clingan. They couldn't do that. And then they took Zach Edey, right? Who's a different kind of big. And there are some things to like about him, right? He's a guy that can score around the basket. He's got a ton of size, ton of strength, and he's not like a complete slug for his size, right? He's a relatively mobile guy for a guy that big. I mean, he's 7'4", 300 pounds or whatever. And to be fair, he's played in a lot of big games, right? He was in the national championship game a couple of times. They didn't win, but that's okay. Because it's not going to be held against you if you lose in the national championship game going into the NBA, because you're kind of coming in with somewhat of a clean slate. But I'm sure it helps. But you know what I mean. Either way, it's a polarizing pick, because then there's also things where it's like, well, he is huge, and could that possibly be a problem? Maybe guarding. If he has to switch out onto the perimeter, right? But, again, there's some benefits to it where you get a big guy, and we know that Jaren Jackson Jr. ideally is at his best playing next to alongside another center, right? Him and Steven Adams, right? That duo worked really well. He's a very different player from Steven Adams, because I think he's a little bit more offensive, oriented. Even though Adams, he's got the touch with the hook shot, and he's a good passer playmaker, but Edey's more of like a low post guy. I'm curious to see if he does that as much in the NBA, right? Or if they're going to kind of try to turn him into a screen and roll guy that maybe occasionally, if there's a mismatch, score in the post. Can he rebound? Can he block shots? And that's really the main thing that you're looking for your center position for Memphis. So it's something that could pan out just because of the fact that there weren't that many centers available anyways at that point. Even in free agency. So the fact that you got one, and got one through the draft, that's a cheap option for the next few years. And if he actually does turn out to be good, that could be a steal, right? I'm not saying he's going to, quote unquote, be the steal of the draft, but it's possible if it works out, that could end up being an even better looking pick down the line. So, obviously they made out well with that. As long as you came out of the draft with at least a big, that's good, right? Then Jalen Wells, right? That was their other pick. No relation, but he was the second round pick, 39th overall, right? Basically kind of like a solid, well-rounded guy, right? In college, he was a very good shooter. So and obviously that's something that Memphis could use. They actually, from the 3-point line last season, in terms of their team stats, they were not very good. They were 29th overall. They did take a lot, but obviously there's so much that it's kind of hard to factor in because of the fact that, barely any of their guys played, right? So obviously, when you look at their offseason, you're kind of looking at it as a continuation of last offseason because of the fact that we just haven't seen that many games of them all playing together. So this is where I think it's going to be kind of cool to see what the Grizzlies look like next season because of the fact that what's the starting lineup going to be? It's going to be very different from the starting five that had been, a playoff team for the 3 seasons prior, right? Where you had, Ja, Desmond Bane, Dylan Brooks, Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams, right? Because obviously Brooks is gone and Adams is gone. So who slides in there? My guess is probably Marcus Smart, the guy that they traded 2 first-round picks for. He probably gets turned into more of an off-ball-ish type wing that guards up, that guards guys at the 3 and things like that. Because he is a good defender, but you probably don't want him as much guarding smaller, quicker guys anymore, just because I don't think I think his body just isn't really built for that kind of stuff anymore. I think he's just better guarding guys with a little bit more size and muscle. And then at the 5, I'm going to guess it's going to be Zach Edey since they drafted him 9th overall. And, you look at the rest of their center rotation, right? Brandon Clark, well, he's been a good backup center for them. He came off the Achilles tear, and he played 6 games, right at the end of last season. So hopefully he can continue to play. But I'm going to assume it's going to be Edey. And then, the rotation will probably be, those 3 guys plus Edey and Smart. And then after that, probably Clark, Kennard, Aldama, Vince Williams, I'm going to assume is probably going to get burned because he played a decent amount last year and he fits in well as another, solid, versatile swing man, right, that can kind of do things on both ends of the floor. So, they have a lot of options. It's just, I don't know, it's kind of bizarre because it doesn't feel like there's as many natural wings on the roster.
Mm.
But, to be fair, you can experiment because you have Jaren Jackson Jr., who's a really good defender. And, you're going to have a big guy in Zach Edey. You're going to be able to have some bigger and smaller lineups. So there's a lot you could kind of play around with. But then obviously you also got to factor in, last season, Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr., they had a lot of games where they basically had to kind of take on the bulk of the offensive responsibilities. And you look at their numbers, right? Their efficiency was impacted by that, right? Like they didn't shoot quite as well from the field as the years prior. Like Bane, he averaged 24, 5.5 assists, 4 rebounds, 46 from the field, which is still good, 38%, which is still good, but a little bit worse than the 48 and 41 from the field. And then Jaren Jackson Jr., right, obviously with a much bigger offensive responsibility for him, right? He averaged 18 and 5.5, but his 3-point percentage dropped. And that's something that you'd like to see him, get back, right? Because the year before he shot 36% from three. Even though for his career, he's not like that amazing of a 3-point shooter. But he also had multiple seasons where he missed so much time that how much does that factor in? Right? Like, his second year, he shot just under 40% on 6.5 attempts a game, but only in 57 games, right? And then the next season, 28% in just 11 games, and then 78, 63, and 66. So, obviously we'll see if he can kind of continue that. The blocks went down, but again, I don't think that's too much of a negative because it's just you have to factor in who he's playing alongside, right? Like there weren't as many opportunities to do a lot of crazy defensive things last year with the Grizzlies, even though like defensively as a team, they were 12th overall. So, I mean, that's, kind of, I guess, a nice thing to look at, but you're expecting a big jump mainly offensively. And then John Morant, that's their superstar. He's going to be 25. He's coming back. And, this is kind of another big year for him, right? Because obviously he had the controversial stuff off the court, right, a couple seasons ago. And that was kind of the beginning of what was a tough season for him, right? Because he missed the first 20 whatever games of the season. Then he comes back, plays pretty well, looks like he hadn't really lost a step at all. And then unfortunately he gets hurt. He has the shoulder injury, and then that puts him out for the remainder of the season, right? But he still gave you 25 and 8 with 6 rebounds, 47 from the field, 3-point shot, not really there. But again, only in 9 games, very small sample size. So the main question is, can we get superstar John Morant back, right? Because when he was last healthy and playing, right, he was kind of considered like a borderline top 10 player, right? Some people had him in that top 10. So, now his ranking and his stock has kind of fallen a little bit because you've had some guys come in over the last couple of seasons like, Edwards and others that have kind of usurped him in terms of his ranking in the league. So he needs to be able to get that back. And that's, kind of the biggest factor for them is, can he be healthy? Can he be available mentally as well, right? So, like, if he can kind of get all that under control and he still ends up playing well or potentially continues to improve, then that's where you could have, like a really sneaky dark horse type of team, right? I'm not saying that they're going to be coming out of the West, but it's possible that they could go back to being, hey, like we got to the second round, and if something really, really goes our way, maybe we're in the conference finals. I don't think that will happen, but I do think that Memphis could be much better than I think some people might expect. And it feels like it's gotten to the point where a lot of other people are catching on as well. But it's hard to ignore it just because of the fact that we know when these guys were last healthy, they were a terrific team, right? They were a 50-plus win team, and they could do it again. You just need those 3 guys, I think, to play at least 60 games together. If you can get at least 60 games together for all 3 of those guys, and I'm talking about like all of them together, 60 games, not all of them playing 60 games each, but if they can all play together, right? Because then they could have other games where like two are there, or like 1 or whatever, and that could be okay. But as long as all 3 guys are relatively healthy and playing together, I think they're going to make the playoffs and be able to avoid the play-in just because they have, the top tier talent, and they're going to have a lot of good defense behind them, and a lot of good play on both ends of the floor. So, I'm pretty high on this team. Like I said, I don't really expect them to come out of the West, but I think, some of these other teams that are kind of maybe feeling like they're on the downward trend, right? Like some of the teams in the Pacific Division, right? I could see the Grizzlies overtaking probably all of them, other than maybe the Suns, because the Suns could win a decent amount of regular season games. But, But I think the Grizzlies are going to be in that probably second tier now, right? Where they're not going to be in that first tier with those 4 teams that a lot of people think could make the finals, and you can make a case for it. But they could be the team right after that, right? Where they're really good. Maybe they're still like a couple pieces away, but we know that they're going to have a chance to, be probably like a top 6 team, I think.
Yeah, 100%. I agree.
So I would
This
say A- for their offseason.
Yeah. I'm kind of in that same tier, just a little bit lower because,
Mhm.
granted, it's not really their fault, but it does kind of factor into it. Is like, they didn't have a whole lot of room to do a whole lot. We're kind of looking at,
Right.
retaining all your guys, improvements as well. But, them hitting on this draft pick, I think is the biggest thing.
Mhm.
And it's perfect because we already know how good this team was and really Ja was when Steven Adams was out there. And I think, a guy like Zach Edey is kind of the ideal replacement for a guy like Steven Adams. He's bigger, and he can move guys out of the way probably just as well. And that's pretty much what would happen. Like, Ja had a lot of clear lanes because Steven Adams was quite literally bullying people out of the paint. So I kind of
Mhm.
expect that to seamlessly transition. And then the other guys, like, this is going to be like the first season I feel like that we see this new core, I guess, with Marcus Smart, in the rotation and everybody healthy because defensively they're going to be menacing, like actually, because you've got Triple J, got Marcus Smart, Zach Edey as well. I think it's going to be a scary squad. Like you said, I think the gaping hole, okay, maybe not gaping, but the visible hole for sure is the wing spot, especially since
Mhm.
GG is going to be hurt for a little bit. So who kind of overtakes that? I'm curious about that and who fits well. But I mean, it'll probably be Marcus Smart, like you said. He's just gonna have to play up, and Desmond Bain too. Shout out to him because I feel like he's one of the more underrated guys in the league at the moment. But overall, you
Yeah.
can't really hate on the offseason because, like you said, they did a good job with the draft picks. And I think Zach Edey's won the starting job just based off of his size and skill. I don't think he's going to be a bust at all. And the cool thing is he has 4 years of college experience, which is awesome. A lot of guys
Yep.
don't really have that. So he might be one of those
Not like
NBA ready awesome guys.
Yeah, it's not like you're taking a 19-year-old rookie.
Exactly. And then Kennard coming back, that's huge for them because they do need shooting. Alongside, guys like Ja, because Ja, he's not the best 3-point shooter, serviceable, makeable, but, definitely not the best. But I am thinking that it's a revenge tour for the entire team, not just Ja.
Mhm.
They're going to, like you said, try and reclaim everything that they kind of lost over the past couple of seasons, whether it be through injury or controversy, whatever. But, you know, this is kind of like the post Dylan Brooks experiment, and I really want to see what it looks like because I think the team has the capabilities to go far. Maybe not the farthest, like you were hinting at, but you know, good stuff. And you also kind of moved on from what's his name, Zaire Williams. So
Mhm.
that gives you a little bit of flexibility, I guess. In terms of the wing
Yeah.
spot, just
And
more opportunities for guys.
yeah, and I'd rather have the other guys that they have on the roster play than him. Like I'd rather have Vince
100%.
Williams playing minutes or, Marcus
Even
Smart
Jalen
or
Wells.
yeah, yeah. I'd have rather have those guys over Williams. He just wasn't playing that well. He had a decent rookie year, but just unfortunately wasn't really able to build off of it. Maybe he will in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
But yeah, but who knows? But
So I give him a B.
but that's yeah, and that's the nice thing about some of those wing guys where it's like they are like say like a Williams or some other guys like that where he's a serviceable 3-point shooter while also being a solid defender because that's kind of one of the issues with say like a Kennard where he's a pure 3-point shooter and he's
Yeah.
very good at it, but how much can you realistically play him in big moments because of the defense, but that's why you have all these other guys too, so hopefully if their 3-point shooting can improve, right, then that's where you can have some big things because even a guy like Asante Aldama, right? Like that guy was a solid, long distance shooter for them
Yeah.
as a big. Even like a Jake LaRavia,
Yeah.
and other guys like
Jeez,
that.
I
I mean,
forgot
so
about Jake LaRavia. And then he wound
yeah,
up getting hurt too, right?
yeah, because he
That's
played. We saw him in the
crazy.
summer league and didn't really play.
Yeah.
But then after all those injuries happened, then he played a lot more
Yeah.
during the latter stretch of the season and
Mm-hmm.
played well. Of course, I mean, like there was a lot of opportunities, so I don't know how much he'll actually play, but they have some solid depth in some of these areas, and like I said, it would be nice if they could acquire like another like real wing as opposed to kind of like a guy masquerading as a wing.
Sure.
But either way, I mean, all these teams are gonna have weaknesses. It would be nice to have it just so that
Those
that way,
guys
like
don't grow on trees. That's the problem. Like
right,
if it was
exactly,
that easy, then Cleveland would have done, what we're kind of asking them to
right,
do too. But,
yeah, and that's the tough part because like you said, they're not easy to acquire,
yeah.
but not every team not every team has a wing like that, but there are some teams that do. Where you're just gonna have even teams where like Luca plays the guard spot, but he's wing size, so like
Oh yeah, for sure.
you wouldn't put like a guard on him because that guy would be too small.
Yep.
Um, so like if you're Memphis, like you would need a guy where you can be like, all right, we're gonna put you on Luca, right?
Because I don't think
Or
Marcus Smart could handle that task, if you want me to be honest. I
I
feel
mean
like
he's
he could
got the
make it
strength, but
difficult, but
yeah, he's got it's kind of like Lou Dort esque sort of where it's like he'll give him as much as he can. It's just the issue is that the height discrepancy at a certain point becomes a little bit too much, just
yeah,
because like Luka's also tall, and it's not just Luka, right? Like there'll be other teams where you'll have to worry about some of those wing sized guys.
yeah.
Again, as we've already mentioned, right? Like I mean, you're gonna have to worry about like a Kawhi, a Durant, a LeBron. And then obviously in the East, right, you're gonna have Tatum and Brown, right? Which is kind of like the preeminent wing duo at this point.
Yeah.
I guess Paul George for Philly, and then whoever else you kind of want to add in there. But that's where I'm kind of curious to see how that looks. But I do like a lot of the other pieces for this team. And either way, like, you look at their over under according to Vegas, and they got them at 47.5, right? So that's 20 wins more than last year, which, should be doable, right?
Yeah.
Especially if Jock can give you 60 games, 65 games. And then, again, you can get somewhere around 60 plus from everyone, from the other two core guys, right? And then everyone else has relative health, right? Because you're not going to have everybody play 82 games. This isn't 2K. But if everybody can have like a reasonable level of health, I'd say you could take the over on that just because of the fact that, I could see them winning 50 games in the Western Conference. And I'm sure they'll be able to beat up on a lot of the, bad teams as well. So, and they'll be able to give a lot of the good teams some trouble too. Obviously, like, I don't know how many people are going to take them by surprise since we have seen Memphis be good before, but it's going to be a shock to the system because, last year, like, you could kind of just walk in and then basically beat Memphis. I mean,
The
especially towards
Wizards
the
beat
end.
Memphis.
Yeah, especially towards the end when they were playing, like two-way guys, like for almost
Yeah.
the entire, like with the entire lineup was like two-way guys who just got signed to the team. Like once it gets to the point where there's guys that you don't even know who they are playing,
It's bad.
yeah, but that's not going to happen too much this year. So I feel like some of these other teams, like even a team like Houston or New Orleans, like I would probably trust Memphis, over those teams, just because of the fact that I've seen those three guys together before with talent around them, and I've seen them be able to win a lot of games. So I think that there's a level of trust already established there, and the defensive identity too. It's like I said, it's going to be different because you don't have Dylan Brooks and Steven Adams, right? You don't have those type of players, but you still have some solid players around that core. So I think that team's going to be really good, but I don't necessarily know if I can see them in the finals. Like I feel like you would need like at least another year, of retooling or whatever to figure that out. Like I don't see that, but I could definitely see them in the second round for sure. Like I could definitely see that. And they could be one of those teams where, because we know whenever we rank all these teams, just like last year, half the time it ends up being a little bit different, right? And there's always at least a couple of teams where there's injuries, and then they end up falling in the standings, relative to what we expect. And Memphis could be that team that ends up being, much higher in the standings than expected. Just because, like, if those guys are healthy, they can win a lot of regular season games.
Yeah. A couple of things before I talk about the over under. Number one, I think a big contributor to our grades is obviously the lack of identity shift. Like normally when teams get hurt, they kind of want to retool and revamp and then, maybe over correct some things, but they didn't do that here. They kept the same identity, defense first, and you have your superstar to kind of carry the load offensively. And you have I think a solid number two in Desmond Bain. So that's that. And then the other thing I also wanted to mention was the reason why my grade was a little bit lower was the fact that they still haven't really figured out the wing thing, because like going back to when they were actually decent or actually really good, like look at who was playing the wing, like freaking David Roddy. Like that doesn't really help. That doesn't make your team a whole lot better. So, that kind of unfortunately is still there. So that's another reason why my grade was a little bit lower than yours. But for the over and under, my logic is take a look at who won like 49 games last year.
Yeah.
New Orleans, Phoenix, Dallas is in that range too. They won 50. So I could for sure see them going over. I think that's kind of like a no-brainer as long as they're healthy. If they're unhealthy, then it might be over, But health-wise, they're going to get
be
it.
said for any team. And
Yeah,
that could be said,
exactly.
for any team, to be fair. But like you said, and that's a good point, where you look at the rest of the teams that were around that 47 to 50 win range, and I could see, like again, like you mentioned, New Orleans. If you go to 46, right? Warriors, Kings, Lakers, Pelicans, Suns, Mavs, Clippers, and I could
Yeah.
see the Grizzlies, being better than a chunk of those teams, right? Like maybe not necessarily better than like Dallas, maybe they could be, but somewhere in that range. And I could see Phoenix winning a decent amount of regular season games, but Clippers probably won't win 50 games next season.
Mm-hmm.
Pelicans probably not. I mean,
Nope.
I don't
Not
think
as
so,
currently
but
constructed.
yeah, and then the Lakers, I don't think so.
Nope.
Kings, I don't think so.
Nope.
Warriors, I don't think so.
Nope.
Rockets, neither. So yeah, I mean, I'd say, and that's my point when I'm saying like I think that they're not going to be in the play-in, and there's a chance for them to climb even higher than expected if those guys are healthy and all those surrounding pieces gel. So this is going to be nice because we're going to get to see hopefully what it actually looks like with the surrounding pieces alongside that core. Because then, if it doesn't work, then maybe you can make some tweaks at the deadline or whatever, as opposed to, as opposed to something different, right? But I would anticipate that it would at least be fine because again, it's going to be a little bit different. But like you said, it's still a defense first team, right? Like even though some of the personnel's been swapped out, the identity is the same, and you still have the same three guys that are the core, and that's the real core,
Yeah.
right? Like Dylan Brooks and Steven Adams are additional pieces, but they're not necessarily the core, right? It's it's Desmond Bain, and it's Jaren Jackson Jr. Those are your
Mm-hmm.
three stars, and you build around that. So it's gonna be a little bit different, but again, like you said, the identity is still there, and that's why it's nice to get a guy like a Zach Edey in the
Yeah.
draft, just because of the fact that
So,
that's a big guy that on certain nights you could play through him possibly if depending on the matchup. And it's nice that he's not a 19-year-old. So he is going to hopefully come in with an already established skill set and, be able to kind of do some things for you, right? And that's the nice part about, being drafted to a team like this as opposed to if he was on a really bad team because the expectations would probably be much higher, right? Obviously, it's always tough to put a rookie in a situation like this, but it's, you're not putting a rookie in a situation where he's trying to start for a championship team. He's going to be a starter on a good team, and he's already kind of coming in understanding and knowing certain things probably. So his adjustment may not be quite as, slow as maybe some other guys, right?
yeah.
That will probably take him some time. Like say like a Yves Missy for the Pelicans, he's got potential as like a athletic, sizable big, right? That could block shots, rebound, catch lobs and whatnot. But it's probably going to take him some time to adjust to the NBA level because he's, a 20-year-old, that doesn't have quite as much experience in these type of situations. But, and again, maybe he doesn't start. I don't know who starts at center for the Pelicans. We talked about that. But either way, for Memphis, it's a different look, but it was probably time anyways, right? Just because we knew that once what happened in the playoffs happened, like we knew that there were going to be changes, right? Because for
Yeah.
Adams, unfortunately, he just wasn't healthy. He's healthy now, right? But that's 2 seasons later.
Right.
And then for Brooks, it just felt like he fell out of favor with the Memphis
Yeah.
organization. So kind of scapegoated. But again, it's tough to kind of stay there if they don't want you. So
Yeah. True.
that just so. But either way, yeah, so in terms of the rest of the Memphis team, I mean, that's kind of the main thing we've covered. Again, I like this, the starting group. We'll see what the second unit looks like, but they have a lot of options. But again, I think this is going to be a really good team. and I think they're going to be in the mix of it in the Western Conference. Like I said, I don't expect them to be a team that goes to the finals, but worst case scenario, it's another spoiler. And best case scenario, second round, maybe conference finals, Indiana-esque if you get lucky. But I would expect the Grizzlies, like you said, to have a revenge season, because I'm sure they were probably hoping that that would happen last year, but it didn't because nobody was able to play. So
Yeah.
let
Because
us.
one more thing.
Yeah, sure.
I was like on the finals thing because I forgot that I didn't even say where I thought they were going to go in the playoffs. I agree with you. Second round, the only way they do get to the finals, which I think they're a couple years from that, even potentially being the case. If you want me to be honest, I think Ja has to ascend a little bit more, and then either Zach Edey or GG has to develop a little bit more into
Right.
not necessarily like a serviceable player, but more of a solid, consistent option. And it's kind of hard to even talk about Zach Edey that way because we haven't really seen him play. He hasn't played a minute of legit NBA competition yet. So that's why I'm like, yeah, I think just a couple of seasons for those guys. But John needs to
Right.
ascend. I think that's the main thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because I just think, starting a rookie center regardless is a tall task for
Yeah.
anybody. I mean, a rookie regardless, but center, point guard, it doesn't matter. That relying on a rookie as a starter is always kind of tough to kind of put somebody in a situation like
Mm-hmm.
that where you can go to the finals, right? You're not talking about like Magic Johnson or somebody in that tier, right? You're talking about like a guy just kind of sliding in, um, you know, trying to help out a team. But again, I expect it to probably be a little bit of a transition, but I think he could probably get with it a little bit faster just because, again, I think he's got certain skill sets that, could translate right away, the touch, and the size and things like that. But again, not perfect, but it's better than what you had, right? Because ultimately, again, they did what they needed to do. Their assignment going into the offseason was, can you get somebody at the center spot, either in the draft, through trade or free agency, and they got one, right? And so again, if it pans out, that's a solid player you'll have for several years.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Memphis Grizzlies and where you see them relative to the rest of the Western Conference. Because of the fact that, again, we haven't seen them in a minute, so they could be one of those teams where it's like, wow, I forgot what it was like when the Memphis Grizzlies were actually good. Because when they're good, they're a fun team to watch. Even though I know they can be kind of polarizing, just because of some of the antics. But I expect that type of stuff, like I'm sure if they're winning, you'll see it, but it won't be quite as probably as obnoxious as maybe some people found it prior. Because I think losing in the playoffs like that, it forces you to kind of adjust and to the humbling that you got.
100%.
Yeah. So moving on, some other stories coming around the NBA that we can kind of get into a little bit, right? So Derrick Rose, he retired. Obviously you're watching this on Friday, but he retired Thursday morning, right? Age of 35, 15 seasons. For his career, again, had a pretty good career, honestly, right? Obviously not the career I'm sure that we would have, hoped for necessarily, but again, for his career, what, like 17 points, 5 assists, 3 rebounds. It's just obviously rough that once the injuries happened, he just unfortunately wasn't the same guy. But the fact that he got injured and he was still able to give you, 15 seasons or whatever, even though I know a lot of those seasons he didn't necessarily play a whole lot all the time. But that's still, impressive. But it is rough because I feel like if you simulated, his career again, right, there's a world where he doesn't have that horrible injury, and then he ends up being like, I don't know, if, like kind of like an maybe not all time point guard, but certainly one of the elite point guards that we've seen because he already had an MVP at the age of 21.
Youngest
Um,
MVP, right?
exactly, yeah, and it's just kind of wild because he was like an Iron Man those first 3 years. And then, of course, he just had the really bad luck year 4, and then it just kind of just was a downward spiral from there, right? And, like off the court stuff as well.
Yeah.
But just kind of wild, right? Like he was drafted in 2008, and he was in the same draft as Westbrook, but he was still able to be like an effective player for a while. But it is just kind of funny, right? Because when they were both in that draft, and obviously, like initially, I guess Westbrook was seen as a little bit more of a project just because he wasn't the number 1 pick.
Mm-hmm.
But both of those guys ended up being really good. It's just a shame in terms of the injuries, just what happened. Because again, like, he's probably going to end up being the only guy to win an MVP that doesn't make it into the Hall of Fame. Because again, everyone else that was able to do it is going to, and guys that have won it but are still playing, they're going to be in there. But he's probably going to be the only one. But still, hats off to still a good career, because again, NBA players still don't normally play 15 seasons. But just kind of an interesting point, because he had been waived by the Grizzlies earlier in the week, and when that happened, right, people were kind of wondering what was going on, right, and I think it was like he wasn't getting any of the money back, and then he was kind of posting some stuff that was kind of hinting at, all right, it's probably time to retire, and then it happened. So
yeah, shout out to D Rose, bro. I don't care who you are, but like, this guy was everybody's favorite player at one point. I don't care. The stuff that he was able to do, I feel like, for his position, size, all that stuff was just amazing.
yeah,
Especially like you said, in those really the first 3-4 years up until the injury, like, it was phenomenal. Like, he was really supposed to be the Bulls' savior, if you want me to be honest. But like you said, things didn't work
sounds
out.
good.
One of the biggest what ifs of all time, I feel like, a lot of people would consider him, an all-time great if he wasn't hurt. But like you said, the fact that he was able to bounce around and still be a productive player and, not completely just fall off the face of the earth is pretty cool. And, eventually he kind of transitioned into that veteran role. So, kind of mentoring guys and stuff like that. So, yeah, shout out to D Rose. And he had a great career, just, not the full potential of what, we thought, due to injury, out of his control. Really sad.
Right. Yeah. Right, exactly. Like, when you look, like, you wouldn't call him a bust, because he
No, no,
was
no.
able to be really good, and it was the injuries that ultimately, like, kind of limited what he was gonna really be able to do ceiling wise. But but it's just rough, but it's just kind of wild, right? Because we're at the point now where, like, some of these guys that we watched, like, when we were in high school or middle school or whatever, like, those guys are getting ready to be on their way out, right?
Yeah,
Because
we're
again,
hitting Unk status, bro.
he was drafted back in 2008, right? Which is, funny enough, that's 1 year before Steph, 1 year right after Durant.
Yeah.
So, we're kind of getting to that point where, some of these guys, it's like that guy Kevin O'Connor, where he says, don't take so and so for granted, right? Where it's like, you
Literally.
can't take some guys for granted, because at a certain point they're going to be on their way out, and then you're
They'll
going to be
never
like,
play NBA basketball
yeah,
ever again.
yeah, exactly. So, just, it's wild, right? That
Yeah.
we got here, but
Shout
again,
out to D
it
Rose
was,
for the 50-point career night too. I feel like that was an
yeah,
emotional night for, like I said,
yeah,
all NBA watchers.
right. That was back, I think, when he was in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, yeah, shout out for an awesome career.
Yeah.
And then, also going around the league, um, Zach Lowe fired from or laid off, excuse me, from ESPN. Um, yeah, what the heck? That's
I don't
just kind
know.
of,
It's random, right?
yeah. And something that I thought about is, they had a couple other layoffs, I think, a month ago. They were football related, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right?
That
What
was
was
like
it? Like
RG3.
RG3 and somebody else. But then
Yeah.
also last year they had, all those layoffs as well, right? Where you had guys like Jalen Rose, Max Kellerman,
Yeah.
Keyshawn George, I
Yeah.
think, right? Yeah, yeah,
Michael
and
Irving, I think too. Like, all those
yeah,
guys were out.
Jeff Van Gundy
Yeah.
also, like a bunch of people. So the last couple of years, ESPN has been getting, and I'm sure they probably also have laid off people that aren't big names, but
Oh
maybe like,
yeah, for
smaller
sure.
employees or whatever. But just kind of wild. And Woj obviously just left. I mean, he wasn't
Yeah.
laid off, but he left. He got out while the getting was good. So
Yeah.
something's going on over at ESPN, just because, that's kind of unusual to let go of that many relatively high ranking prominent people, that, in such a short amount of time. I'm curious to see where he goes next. Because, he was really good at what he did. One of the best, honestly, at ESPN.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, because I didn't really expect it. Because, like, 2 days ago, I was listening to a podcast of his on ESPN, where he was interviewing JJ Redick, and he was talking to him about coaching and things like that. And he was talking about, an Embiid's extension and whatnot. And then 2 days later, it's like, boom, he's gone.
Yeah, it's weird. Apparently, people are talking about it's like salary based, so I guess they're really trying to downsize. Like, apparently, it was over a 7-figure salary, which is cool,
Yeah,
but
I did hear
I
about
don't
that.
know. I don't know. That's kind of unfortunate because I feel like he's one of those guys that you kind of want to keep around. Like, that's like the equivalent of like firing Windhorse, bro. Like, or
Right.
like you said, excuse me, laying off Windhorse or Wilbon or something. Like, you just don't do that. Like, normally you would consider these guys kind of in the safe zone. I guess the only untouchable is Stephen A at this point. Probably Stephen A and Malika. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah. And then I guess the other guy, geez, what's the football guy?
Greeny?
Pat McAfee.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, Pat
Yeah.
McAfee. Yeah, bring him. Do you think Pat McAfee might be the cause of it? No speculation and no tinfoil hat here, but ever since he
Yeah, I
joined, they've
don't
been
know.
starting to lay people off. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't know, because again, it just. I feel like for ESPN, it must just be kind of just an issue where I think they're just kind of struggling with the modern environment, in terms of like just like the sports journalism, news, and things like that. Because
Yeah.
just so many things have changed so quickly, but it doesn't seem like they've been able to adjust to it. Which you'd be kind of surprised because they're such a giant company. They're owned by Disney. So it's not like they, in theory, shouldn't have the resources to kind of be able to figure out what to do. So,
Fox
but I
has
think
been
that's just kind
struggling
of what,
too, though. Like, I think
yeah,
what's his name? Skip Bayless. Like, that show is done, undisputed.
right, exactly. And like it's
So
just yeah, because he left too.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, but I don't
Shannon
know. Like I
Sharp
said, I think
gone.
it just kind of goes back. I think it just kind of goes back to it. Just seems like there's been a little bit of a struggle for I guess these big companies to kind of adjust to streaming and the fact that a lot of
Podcasts,
people now will get their information from just online,
podcasts.
not necessarily, podcasts that aren't, ESPN, like podcasts, hopefully like ours and
Yes,
things like
please
that.
like, subscribe, all that stuff.
Yeah,
Oh God.
exactly. So that's what I think it's coming from. So again, obviously nobody's cheering somebody getting laid off. So hopefully he can, find someone, to team up with. I don't know if it's going to be something like The Ringer or if it's, going to be some other network. Who knows? But, that guy was really good at what he did. And it just doesn't feel, to me, it's never good to get rid of people who are really good at what they do. One of the best at your company. That never really makes sense to me. So just bizarre because it's just it's so many people in such a short amount of time, and it was just in waves, which I know that's kind of what they do with layoffs, but
Yeah.
just again, just a lot of prominent people that were relatively good at what they were doing that all of a sudden are just leaving what's supposed to be, one of the biggest sports news companies in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, but obviously we'll see where that continues to go. But just I don't know, just a bizarre series of events there. I don't really know what to make of that one. But
Yeah.
either way, also just like a couple of quick things. So obviously in the post Woj era, right? There's been kind of news breaking from multiple sources, and we'll get into more of them. But it sounds like Kawhi, he underwent an off-season knee procedure. Will be limited to start at training camp. Some other injuries as well, like Mitchell Robinson, supposedly isn't going to be available until December or January, which is very significant because that's their starting center. And then Bruce Brown also underwent knee surgery as well, so he's going to be out for a little bit. And then Vanderbilt, according to Palenka, had surgery on both of his feet in the offseason, and we just didn't know about it. So
What's his injury? Like, I feel like it's been a mystery injury for 2 years now.
Yeah, I mean, he got hurt in February with the foot, and my guess is that he was probably trying to rehab without surgery, and it probably just wasn't working.
Yeah.
So then they probably do the surgery, but we just never knew about it until the other day.
Weird.
Because obviously media will be coming up for all these teams on Monday.
Yeah.
We've had a couple with the Celtics and the Nuggets already, but yeah, like when I heard about that, I was like, whoa, that was unexpected, and I was like, no wonder I hadn't seen him in forever, and no wonder there was talk about him maybe not being available when the season is getting ready to start, because it's like, well, now that makes sense. I just would have been nice to have known that before, because I don't know, it just is always kind of bizarre how some of these teams handle these injury conversations. I get that some of the information is, personal,
Sensitive, yeah.
but I don't know, sensitive information, but I don't know. It was just kind of weird because just that we didn't know anything. It's like, well, why was he listed as available to play like back
Right.
in the playoffs? And then obviously he wasn't going to.
Yeah, it's weird, but I will say all three of those, I think it was three, blows to those teams are very significant. I think it was four actually, if I want to count Bruce Brown.
Yeah,
So Kawhi, that's a big
possible trade.
deal.
Yeah, possible trade chip Bruce Brown.
True. Mitchell Robinson, that's freaking huge.
Yeah,
Just as big as the
yeah,
Kawhi thing, honestly. No center in New
no.
York. Jeez, what are we doing? Like, yeah, what are we doing? Like, what's going on with the center voids on all these teams? Like, the center rooms are really bad.
Yeah, Randall small ball 5, I guess.
Zion small ball 5, and then yeah, those are big time injuries. I feel like.
And obviously, like for some of these teams that we haven't covered yet, like we'll be talking about the Clippers and the Lakers. We've already talked about the Knicks, but some of those teams that we haven't covered yet, we'll get into and talk about those in a little bit more depth.
They're coming up.
And maybe more information about it. And we'll also, again, we'll be able to talk about Media Day for a lot of these teams as well, because Media Day is always kind of a funny thing because it's always supposed to be it's basically the most optimistic that a lot of these teams will be at the start of the season. Some teams, obviously, it'll get better, like if they win the championship or whatever. But, for like every team is optimistic on Media Day by and large.
Where the hype begins.
Even the teams where it's like, even the teams where you just kind of know, oh, this is not a great situation. But, everybody always puts on big happy faces and whatnot. And, there's always at least a few quotes that come out from somebody that are always like kind of funny or entertaining.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure we're gonna get at least a couple of moments from these. I'm sure there's there's bets on what is Jimmy Butler gonna look like for the Heat's Media Day, since he's been doing that as a thing the last few seasons. But
that's crazy.
Who knows? I mean, because he had, what was it, last year was the goth thing. Year before it was, like the braids or whatever. So I don't know. I mean, maybe he just puts on like a mask of another player.
That would be weird.
Yeah, and maybe like a mask of like an older player or something. Yeah, but either way, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts in the comments about the Memphis Grizzlies, their offseason, what your expectations of them are. What are your thoughts on Ja and the rest of the young core for Memphis? And then obviously, what are your thoughts on some of the other stuff, like Zach Lowe and leaving ESPN, right, or Derrick Rose's retirement? Maybe you have a favorite Derrick Rose moment you'd like to share in the comments. We'll see if somebody does that. But again, as I've already mentioned, the season is getting closer, right? I think about a week from now we're gonna have preseason, and then obviously as we have more preseason, we'll get closer to the regular season opening night. So NBA basketball is is coming, and it's coming fast. So we're gonna keep everybody updated as we continue to do episodes for this show, and everything else that we've been planning on doing. So continue to like, comment, and subscribe. If you leave a comment, we'll read it at the beginning, and we'll see you in the next episode.